Movie opens up with a man being apprehended by a gang of criminals with various superpowers. The man was arrested after failing to kill a man named Jack Walkers, also known as Payback. Payback arrived soon after. Payback also possessed a superpower, which was a powerful physique. Payback could easily defeat them with this power. At the same time, the cops arrive to apprehend Payback. The scene shifts to show the state of the world after the extraordinary nuclear disaster. The nuclear disaster affected the vast majority of humanity. The exciting part, however, was the impact of nuclear causes on human gene mutations that make them superhumans with various powers, similar to the beginning of the film, which showed Payback and the people who attacked him. They all possessed the power of the Pulse nuclear disaster. As a result, the government attempted to control people with superpowers, but instead created problems that jeopardized citizens' safety by establishing the Santib prison. The scene then shifts to a television interview between a reporter and Warden Devlin, the head of Santib prison, and begins with a report on Payback's arrest. In the interview, Devlin described how tight the Santib prison was, and how no one had ever escaped. Devlin also stated that one of Santib prison's accomplishments was to house one of the most dangerous criminals, the Lobe. But when reporters began questioning Devlin about his unfair and inhumane policies at Santib, he became offended and angry and abruptly ended the interview. On the other hand, new inmates, including Payback, arrived at Santib prison. When Payback arrived, he ran into his sworn enemy, Diamond. The prisoners were being watched over by some supervisors, including Felicia and Captain Brody, Morales, and Danny. The inmates were then hooked up to a device on one of their legs. It has the potential to eliminate superpowers and render them immobile if they attempt to revolt or refuse to obey the guards' orders. Payback and the other prisoners were then given clothes and blankets. Those would be brought into the cell room and assigned to a cell. The prisoners gathered in a field the next day. Payback and Diamond met up again at that location, and they ended up fighting. Even if Payback lost strength, he could still compensate for Diamond's attack, especially when he used blood to draw a cross on his face. It was as if it increased his physical strength, allowing him to finally defeat Diamond. However, just as he was about to kill him, the Watchers intervened by activating the safety device on their feet. Diego, a new prisoner, was watching the fights between Payback and Diamond. A prisoner named the Conductor approached Diego and explained the rules that apply to the prisoners. He explained the first rule to Diego: don't cause any trouble. Rule number 2 is to mind your own business. Third, don't let other prisoners drag you into trouble. Fourth, never borrow anything from other prisoners. During their conversation, they ran into Darius, a close friend of the Conductor and the Lobe. The man was tall and had an alien face. The Conductor explained once more that no one could leave Santib prison because security was so strict. When Diego inquired about the Lobe, the Conductor warned him not to bring it up again. It was also revealed that the Lobe's power could control a person's mind and soul. The scene then shifts to the Lobe being led to the courtroom. If the Lobe could answer some questions from the prison, he would be granted a remission and released. However, the prison authorities always framed the Lobe, so he could never be released. Following the hearing, Devlin met with the Lobe and told him that he needed the Lobe's power to influence the bank. Devlin wanted the money in his account because he was about to retire from his job in Santib. He desired to retire wealthy. The scene shifts to the state of the injured inmate's treatment room. Payback was lying weakly with some other prisoners there. There was also a prisoner who lacked a head. He also appeared to have the ability to regenerate his body. Diego arrived at the treatment room shortly after because he was a cleaning service. Dr. Josephs approached Diego and invited him to get to know him because he believed Diego was not as dangerous as the other prisoners. The Lobe soon came to the infirmary to check on his health. Payback, who had already awoken from his coma, rushed into the room where the Lobe was being examined. Payback then dispatched Dr. Josephs and prepared to assault the Lobe. But Diego came to the Lobe's aid and immediately paralyzed Payback until the guards arrived and arrested him. Diego's heroic actions were also known to the other prisoners, so when he had lunch, he received some gratitude in the form of snacks from the other prisoners. The Conductor also expressed gratitude for Diego's efforts. Following that, Darius was approached by a warden. Darius then approached the Conductor and handed him an iron spoon, whereas the prisoners ate with plastic spoons and forks at the time. Darius then escorted Diego to the Lobe's cell, where the Lobe wanted to meet and thank him. After they met, The Loeb offered Diego a job and gave him some time to think about it. Devlin, on the other hand, delegated a task to one of his men, Captain Brody. Soon after, a woman named Felicia realized what Devlin was up to by harnessing the power of the Loeb. Devlin then presented her with two options. The first option was for Devlin to appoint Felicia as the leader of Santib Prison on the condition that she not interfere with Devlin and the Loeb's affairs. The second option was for him to write to the central authorities and request that she be deported from Santib Prison. For Devlin to appoint Felicia as the head of the Santib Prison, she had to choose the first option. The conductor eventually got a trial turn for the remission of his time in custody. However, the superintendent and warden committed the same fraud on the conductor, and he, like the Loeb, did not receive his remuneration. This enraged him greatly. Then he opened the safety device attached to his leg with the spoon Darius had given him. This allowed the conductor to regain his strength. He immediately used the power of his body to become an electrically conducting medium, just like his pseudonym, the Conductor, to electrocute some of the wardens. Not only that, but the conductor also powered the Santib Prison Conclave, causing other prisoners' safety devices to be damaged and allowing other prisoners to regain power. Devlin, on the other hand, who was aware of the situation, immediately directed Morales to retrieve the conductor. Morales, who possessed the superpower of his fists, could easily have killed him.
Close your eyes.
The death of the conductor was known to the reporters, but they reported that he died in a fire in Santib. Diego was eventually taken to an isolation room by Devlin. Devlin also stated that the isolation room operated on a different time zone. Anyone in it would be tortured by the sensation of time passing slowly. His goal was to inform Diego about the room so that he could persuade the Loeb to work with him. Devlin then returned to the Loeb to offer his cooperation once more. He gave him a 24-hour deadline to make a decision. However, the Loeb eventually agreed to assist Devlin in carrying out his plan. The Loeb requested the Wi-Fi password in order to carry out the action. The scene shifts to Felicia and a couple of supervisors conducting a sweep of the Santib prison dungeons. It was done to determine the extent of the damage to the electricity in Santib prison as a result of the conductor's attack. On the other hand, Diego received several letters from his family, and the Loeb received a smartphone tablet from one of the guards named Danny. Danny was also the warden who gave Darius a metal spoon for the conductor. This allowed the conductor to remove his safety equipment and go on a rampage in Santib prison. Meanwhile, Felicia went to Devlin's room to report on the repair of the electrical power source that the conductor had destroyed. Payback, whose face was depicted with a cross, was met again in the prison yard. While Diego saw the Loeb and informed the warden of the conductor's death. The Loeb also informed Diego that the prisoners were waiting for the play date with bated breath. But Diego couldn't quite understand what the Loeb was saying. Felicia later protested against Devlin because he chose Captain Brody, who was also present, as his successor instead of her. He didn't seem pleased with Devlin's decision, but he agreed to take his place in Santib prison. The following scene depicts Diego exercising in his cell. Devlin had retired from Santib on that day. He then went to see Captain Brody, and Felicia told him that she would survive in Santib prison to help Captain Brody run the activities. He then went to see the Loeb in his cell and asked him to carry out the plan. The Loeb was directly working on what Devlin said, but it turned out that the Loeb did more than just switch bank accounts. The Loeb also used some tricks to make the security tools used by the prisoners inoperable. Payback and Diamond, meanwhile, were preparing for their final fight in the prison field. At the same time, the guards attempted to stop them by activating their tools, but were unsuccessful. Diego, on the other hand, appeared nervous and dizzy because he could sense other people's emotions and was now sensing the emotions of the prisoners. Meanwhile, Felicia attempted to contact Devlin and informed him that the state of Santib was in shambles as a result of the rampaging prisoners. But Devlin ignored Felicia's report because he was retired that day. Furthermore, he received a large sum of money into his bank account. The Loeb hacked into all of the prison's defense systems, restoring all of the prisoners' diverse powers. The warders were overwhelmed by having to deal with the prisoners on the rampage. Felicia then directed Captain Brody to the basement in order to reset the prison security system. However, Diamond went down to the basement, resulting in a fight between Diamond and Captain Brody. Although Diamond initially dominated the fight, Captain Brody eventually prevailed. The Lobe, on the other hand, who had also regained his power, immediately used it to move his soul into Devlin's body. At the same time, Captain Brody had successfully reorganized the Sandtip prison security system, allowing guards to regain control of the prisoners. Following that, a warden appeared in the Lobe's cell and blamed the Lobe for the incident. The Lobe was immediately led into a specific isolation room. Meanwhile, the Lobe, who was now inhabiting Devlin's body, came to meet Felicia and eventually appointed her as Sandtip's prison head in place of Devlin. There was also Payback, who was overjoyed because he had finished off the prisoners who had previously sinned in him. The transition of leadership from Devlin to Felicia also signaled a shift in policy at Sandtip. Felicia and Dr. Josephs collaborated to create a classification of forces among the prisoners, making Diego's escape impossible. He possessed no dangerous abilities that could be transferred from Sandtip prison. Felicia also improved and humanized the security system inside Sandtip prison. The film concludes with the Lobe in Devlin's body, which has been living happily since he was released from prison and has a lot of pension money. Nonetheless, the Lobe remembered to get his best friend Darius out of Sandtip prison and pick him up.